Hi everyone, my name is Maddie and I own this crazy little company called Grey Duck Art. I am going to walk you through kind of start to finish with some tips and tricks of how on earth these Paint Your Pet kits work. Our paint by number process starts a little bit looking overwhelming, right? But once you get a couple colors in, you'll feel a lot better. And I hope that this video will give you some confidence and some tips and tricks as you get started painting. First of all, we are a small business and we have 6 artists that actually hand draw all of these tiny little shapes and details that are going to make up a beautiful picture of your pet. My biggest advice as you get started is going to be trust your artist that drew your paint by number and that picked out all your colors, and trust yourself. I know maybe you've never painted in your life before. Maybe you are starting this project with self-talk that's like, I stink at art, I can't draw a stick figure, how am I gonna do this? I want you to try your best to let go of all of those negative comments. I know it's hard, especially after how many years of telling ourselves that we're not creative, but I promise you can do it. Trust yourself and be a little bit positive with your self-talk as you go through this paint by number, and I promise you'll absolutely crush this. Okay, let's talk supplies first. The first thing, when you open your box, you will see a paint by number of your pet. It might look a little bit more like a forecast and not your pet right now. That's okay. So if you're looking at your paint by number and just overwhelmed with all the shapes, lines, numbers, you can't wrap your head around it yet, that's okay, that's normal. I promise as each color goes on, you'll feel a lot more comfortable with staring at this awesome but detailed paint by number. The next thing that you're going to find underneath your cardboard, now if you are painting at a brewery or a venue and all of your kits were maybe shipped together in bulk, you will probably not have to unpack a box, so that's awesome. Underneath the piece of cardboard, underneath your canvas, you are going to find a supply bag. And in your supply bag, you're going to have a tablecloth. You will also find some paints in your kit bag. These paints will all have a number on them. They are all labeled and they should correlate to all of your numbers on your canvas. The things that you are going to need from your house or the brewery or wherever you're painting is going to be a disposable cup with water to rinse off your brushes and some sort of paper towel or something you can dab your brush off after you wash it. All right, once you have all your supplies out, you're ready to rock. The first thing you want to do before you even start painting is take a picture on your phone of your canvas as well as your paints. 2 reasons. 1, take a picture of your paints because as you're holding these, your hands might get a little sweaty while you're holding your strip of paint and working through all your colors. And some of the numbers might wear off a little bit. Your paint strips will typically go in order, like this strip is 1 through 6, so it should be pretty easy to figure out, but it's also very easy to just snap a picture before you start just to make sure you have all your bases covered. Take a picture, more importantly, of your canvas because as you paint, you're going to cover up numbers, but you might forget to finish painting that entire shape. And so when you're all done and all your numbers are covered and you have a random white space that's still canvas, it's really helpful to look back at that picture and know exactly what number it was supposed to be instead of having to guess or, whatever. So take a picture of both just to, it's a nice security blanket. Okay, before you start painting, one last thing, you want to make sure you pay attention to the little white spots in the eyes and maybe in the nose. You might have one in the nose as well, but for sure the eyes that are left unnumbered. Those are going to be, you want those to be left white. You can just leave them completely white canvas. Those are going to bring a ton of life to your animal. You can probably even see that little white kind of reflection dot in my eye right now. That is going to bring a ton of life to your animal. So please make sure you paint around those and leave those plain white. As you paint around the eye, it might look kind of funky, like there's just like this random white circle in the eye. But when you take your canvas and put it on the wall or, stand back from it a little bit, it will all make sense. Trust me. Okay, as you get started with your paint by number, you're going to realize very quickly that this is not a 20-minute project. This is probably going to take you anywhere between 2 and 6 hours. That's super average, common. So know that you do not need to finish your painting in one sitting at your event or at home at your kitchen table. You can, pick it up and put it down throughout throughout a few weeks. Your paints are going to be good for about 8 weeks. And as you paint, I would recommend that you just open the container of one color at a time. That way none of the other colors dry out. All right, the biggest question that I get asked is, where on earth do I start? I have so many colors and so many numbers and so many shapes. Where do I begin? I would recommend that you go light to dark, and you don't have to follow this as a strict rule, just more of a suggestion. So I would start with the lighter half of your colors first and then progress darker. And generally speaking, that's going to be your lighter colors first. So it's pretty easy to just follow your numbers. So you would go find all of your number ones first. Do all of the number ones you can find. You might forget a color or a shape here and there, and you're gonna have to go back. That's just the nature of this. But go try to find all your number ones first, and then go to do all your number twos, all your number threes, so on and so forth. If your goal is to sit down and do this entire canvas while you're seated right now, or wherever you're going to paint it, you might consider doing the background color first, and here's why. When you are all done, now my dog here does not have much background on him, but when you're all done, it's really nice to be able to carry your canvas on the edges and have the edges be dry instead of having like the nose be dry. So when you're all done, it's really nice to have dry edges. So maybe consider doing your background color first. You don't have to, and if you are not on a mission to finish in one sitting, that truly doesn't matter. There's no negative to doing the background first though, so maybe consider doing the background first. Once you find whatever light color you want to start with, or whatever background color you're going to do first, you are just going to paint. I know that's kind of scary. I'm not going to give you a ton of tips and tricks on how on earth to actually paint your paint by number. I would rather have you go a little bit more carefree and a little bit more globby than stress about your perfect strokes, making sure everything's flat and perfect or anything like that. I always say globby and thick is better than too thin and driving yourself crazy because your numbers and lines aren't getting covered. So I just painted my number one, which is just pure white here. And you can see here that it's kind of thick and globby, and you can kind of see that my brush strokes are not perfect and they're pretty messy. When I am all done painting this, you are truly not going to be able to tell or notice how thick or what direction your brush strokes went in or anything like that. So I always say, as long as it's not dripping down your canvas when you hold it up like this, it's not too thick. So don't be afraid to go a little bit thicker to make sure you cover those lines and numbers. With that said, even if you go pretty thick, I would say that you still might need 2 coats on probably about half of your colors. You'll easily be able to tell if you need a second coat on the color you're painting based on if you can see your lines and numbers through it. So this is my 1, which is white, and the color next to it is going to be number 2. I think these colors might be backwards for you guys, but you get the idea. The color that surrounds my number 1 is going to be number 2. The color that surrounds my number 2 is typically going to be 3. So typically, now not all the time, but typically your numbers will go kind of in order on your paint strips, and they will also go kind of in order on your canvas, which is super nice. So if at any point you're like, oh, is that a 2 or is that a 7? And that 2 shape that you think is a 2 is touching a number 1 shape and a number 3 shape, you can pretty much assume that yes, it's a number 2. So that's a little quick tip as we go as well. So globby and thick is good. It doesn't hurt to do super thin coats. It's just maybe gonna drive you a little bit mentally crazy. So feel free to go as thick or as globby or as thin as you want. Doesn't matter either way. All right, let's touch quick on multiple coats. So let's say you do all of your number 1s. It's a pretty light color, I'm sure of it. And you can still see the lines and numbers through your color. I want you to let it dry and just do another coat. If you are impatient like I am and you want to use a hair dryer, you definitely can do that. But typically paint is going to dry anywhere between about 7 and 20 minutes, depending on how thick you went, of course. If you take your finger and touch the shape that you just painted, if there's no paint on your finger, if it feels dry, you're good to go. There's not going to be like paint that smudges up even though it feels dry or whatever. It's dry if it feels dry. So make sure you cover the lines. Typically there's going to be a line in between 2 different colors, right? And one of those colors is going to be darker. So like here, my 1 is going to touch my 2, and my 2 is 1 shade darker than my 1. And so my 2 might cover that little dividing line better than my 1. So it doesn't really matter if you are going to cover your dividing line in between your shapes with one number or the other number. It's such a thin line, and the reality is as you go, different colors might cover different lines. So just make sure you cover those lines with some sort of color around that shape, and you'll be good. As you paint, you want to paint over the edge of the canvas. Now, this could drive you a little bit wonky as well. So if this is going to drive you too crazy, don't feel like you have to do this, but I think this gives a really nice finishing look. If you continue your number 1 shape here, this is number 1, if you just continue it right down the canvas, so you would just paint right over the edge. I will show you what that looks like a little bit later in this video, but I wanted to mention that now as you start, maybe you're listening to this video as you paint, so make sure you cover the sides of your canvas. That way you don't have to frame it if you don't want to. The reason why we say paint light to dark is this. It's much easier to cover lines, shapes, numbers, other painted areas with dark colors rather than light. So imagine painting dark paint over light paint on your wall at home, much easier than painting a black wall with white paint. So that's why we say go light to dark. It's much easier to touch things up with the dark colors than it is the light colors. Okay, so I just did my first color and my canvas is looking like not much, right? Trust the process as you go through these first 5 colors, because your animal really is not going to look like much after the first few colors. So I will show you as I paint here right now, and I will also give you a couple more tips and tricks as we go. So you can see here my lines are really my brush strokes are pretty messy here. I'll try to get them in the light here so you can see what they look like. They're not flat, they're not perfect. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Now, if it's more stressful for you to have these kind of globby spots and you would rather do 3 or 4 coats of the color, totally fine. You do you. Instead of washing my brush, because all of these colors are so close, I really can get away with just wiping my brush on a paper towel. It doesn't hurt to wash your brush, but it's not necessarily needed as you're going from these really, really, really small jumps in colors, especially if you're working light to dark. All right, so here's the finished paint by number. As you guys can see from afar, especially in a video, it doesn't look like much of a paint by number. It looks more of like a painting. But as you're painting your own paint by number, you are going to see that when it's that close to your face, it really does look like a paint by number. So make sure that you take a step back as you're painting, as you're taking breaks, and as you're finishing your art to see your progress, because truly these are going to look more like a jigsaw puzzle or a paint by number this close to your face, but when you hang them up, step back, they will look like a beautiful picture of your animal, your furry friend. Here are the edges, like I promised to show you guys. So they're not perfect, as you can see, but as you can see, I painted over all of the edges. That way it's a nice finished look when it's all done. And I did the same thing with the background color. So you can kind of either paint straight down across over your shapes and numbers. However you want to do it is fine, but just make sure you kind of roughly bring your shapes over the edge of your canvas. I think it looks really nice. Thank you for supporting our small business, Grey Duck Art. We would love it if you would shoot us a review on Facebook or Google, and even better if you would send us a picture of your final product so we can share it on social. We rely on all of you guys and your awesome pictures of your paintings for marketing. So we would love it if you send us a picture. And if you had a terrible experience, you can stay off the internet. I'm just teasing. We love all feedback.